Okay, so in this segment, we are going to put a cylinder head on a 2025 engine that we are in the process of rebuilding. So we're going to go over putting the gasket in place and putting the cylinder head on, and the procedure for how that works. As you can see, this engine is going through the rebuilding stage. I'll take the camera off the tripod here, and block has been bored, new pistons, top of the block has been resurfaced, resin impregnated, pressure tested, and it's installed and waiting for the cylinder head. Previous video we went through installing the valves. They're all in place and everything is in good shape there. So, and nuts in place. And the reason for those is to keep the cylinder block from falling off whenever we would rotate the engine on the other side when we're putting in pistons and rods and all that. So so these are going to need to come off, which I'll do now. I have them already loosened. They were tightened down since I have a new gasket in here, and I wanted to keep that I wanted to keep pressure onto that, keep the gasket properly sealed. So go ahead and take these off. I'm going to use is a new old stock copper and asbestos gasket. I have a couple of these still hanging around in stock since we're doing all we can for this engine, and this is a wonderful car and it's a really good customer. We figured we'd give him the special treat of a new old stock piece just to make it that much more special. I do have gaskets that are not new old stock that work wonderfully well, and I normally maintain a stock of those. Now the gasket I coated with some of this copper spray, which I find works really well. It gives it just a little extra adhesion. I know this stuff works well because if sometimes I have to take a cylinder head off from somebody else using this, and I can tell that it was nicely stuck in place. So I gave this a spray just a few minutes ago. You can see on the gaskets the rings have little edges on them, and I normally position those so that they're up. Also, being new old stock, it's going to have a part number. At least I thought I saw a part number before on it, but I don't now. So maybe this one didn't have it. Maybe I saw it on another one. So anyway, so I'm going to drop this in place over the studs very carefully. So the studs are flexible enough to move them around and line up the holes. Once we get one end past the threads, we work the next end. I like to wear gloves just to keep from getting the sticky stuff from spreading all around the rest of the shop and on the parts that are nicely finished. Another thing I should point out is that at this stage you want to have the middle row of studs which only thread into the cylinder block in position as well. I see a tiny bit of oil right around that. I want to wipe off real quick. Just to keep it from interfering with the sealing of the gasket. I don't know why it came back up from in there, but oh, I guess it was around the tubes. There we go. Of course, it all works down nicely until you get to the next level of studs. And there it goes. Flop right into place. Everything nicely in place. Any paper towel fuzzies, get them out of the way. And there we have it. Now we're ready to put the cylinder head on in position. So now down with the cylinder head. Take a little bit of time getting your studs to of course one side always has to go quicker than the other. Look down the holes, and a lot of times you can see the culprit and set her down. Of course, being iron, it's a heavy bugger. The washers, originally they had an oil blackened finish to them, and you can again do an oil blackened finish if you want to go through that process. I've been happy with using Krylon semi-flat black. It's very durable. It doesn't leave a heavy buildup that interferes with threads or anything. So we put our little washers and nuts in place. Might need smaller ones. So this process is very much the same with all the pre-war cars. If this were an aluminum head engine, a late Phantom 1 or a Phantom 2 or Phantom 3, then I would have coated the studs well with an anti-seize, which stops the reaction of the aluminum and steel from corroding together and causing lots of problems. It might not be something you would necessarily appreciate later, because it's probably going to be the next guy that's going to have to deal with it. But the next guy will be very happy with you. Go back with putting on our washers. And they used a relatively thick washer under these particular nuts, which is nice because it helps to spread out the load and reduces some of the friction when you're tightening them down. Get all the washers in place. So I'm short on a couple washers, but okay, I'll get more. Let me get the nuts on. Nothing too difficult about this. Make sure all your threads are good and free, which we did prior to the align boring process. Plug back in. I had this cylinder head and block in position while doing the align boring to make sure that the block was going to be perfectly square. They say, I've never experienced this and I hopefully never want to, that if you try to align bore without the cylinder block and head in place, that you might not have true alignment with your main bearings. And so then when you do bolt down your block and head, then your crankshaft will not turn. And I hope never to have that experience. In place here. I figured to just walk through this whole process so that you guys can see what it's all about. I think in the end I'm going to end up putting bigger plugs in the spark plug holes. Get these on. There's a lot of nuts. And every single one of them matters. If one of them is absent, you're not going to get a good seal on the head gasket. So once we get all these nuts on, we'll torque them down. I like starting at a very light torque and working my way up. And the torque figure I like is between 18 and 20 foot-pounds. And then after we do that, and after we run the engine and get it to temperature once or twice, then we'll retorque the head again. So if you get some of these studs to 18 and they feel kind of mushy, then that's it. You stop at that point right there. But normally that's only on when you're retorquing a head on an engine that's hasn't been overhauled. All these studs were well inspected and in good shape. So we get more other rows of nuts. I think there's 32. Here we go. And if you have any that feel really loose and the thread isn't giving a good grab, a good grip, then you certainly need to do something about that. So this is somewhat of a monumental step in the engine rebuilding process. It's a rather large chunk out of the way and back in its position where it belongs. And it's another big step to getting your engine back in the car and running. So it's not something to So if it's not the compressor making a noise and the phone's ringing, or the heater kicks on, just never know. Alright, so all the nuts are in position. Oh, two more over here. And of course you want the cosmetically nice looking nuts on the outside where everybody's going to see them. And you know, after you put this much work and effort into making an engine look pretty, you want to go that further step. So I'll grab my torque wrench here. Now I have it set pretty low right now. You start in the middle and work your way out to either end. You know, just let it get a little snug. So I'll go to the next one to the rear. Handy. So we can wind them down a little quicker. Now in the Springfield Phantom 1 handbook, at least in the reprint, is a torquing diagram for these nuts. And for some reason they didn't offer such a diagram for any of the other ones. But on the other ones I've had perfectly fine luck with just working my way from the center out to the ends. Going out this way. That way, because if you started on the ends and went in, the gasket could deform and then you could end up with a bulge in the middle. But if doing it this way, if there was any bulge, it would work its way out. And I think it's also good for the castings too. I think the castings would flex much better, tightening in the middle and bringing them out instead of one end or the other, than where you could perhaps distort the cylinder head or cause some sort of a process that you don't want to hit. Get all these tightened down. These studs and nuts on the small horsepower car are 5/16 BSF, British Standard Fine. So of course you need a 5/16 BSF socket to do this. On Phantom 1s and 2s, they're 3/8, and you can torque those down to 25 foot-pound. Phantom 3s are also 5/16 BSF, and you do the same torque with those. Of course, you have 32 nuts times 2 on those, you have 64. 3 on that side. The last 3 on the front. Another thing I recommend doing with the small horsepower cars is leaving the very long studs that are over here for the intake manifold out until you have the intake manifold going in place, because they stick out pretty far and you'll be hanging up on them and they can just get in the way. Okay, so we have those lightly tightened. Go back to our torque wrench. This is a click stop type torque wrench. You hear it click. Right now I think I'm at like 10 or 11. And when you go to do your retorquing, you'll have to take the rocker assembly off. In my opinion, there's just no way around it. I know some people will get fancy pro foot wrenches and this and that. And I don't think you're any further ahead doing all that. And you want to make sure you get it properly torqued. Plus, it's a good thing to get those off and check them out, make sure everything's good with them still. And they're going to need to be readjusted anyway. Oh, we're moving along here nicely. Tightening up. Last 3 there. Front 3. Back 3. Bring our torque up. We'll bring it up to 16. always nice to get them clicking right along. Sometimes I overlap and just to make sure I didn't miss them. Rear 3. Okay, 16. Let's go to 19. 17. 18. 19. And they're feeling good. If you think you're taking up a lot on one and you don't hear the click, then just be cautious, because you don't want to break one of these. If you have a broken stud, you're taking the engine back apart again, because there's no way to replace that stud with the cylinder block and the cylinder head in place. There's a flange at the base of the stud, and that flange will not come up through the hole. And that's on later models. There's earlier models, Phantom 1 and 20 horsepower, which has there's a nut on the inside of the stud. And also the stud on some of those has a spline to keep it secure. So you're definitely not replacing that without dropping the oil pan and then even when you have all that out of the way, it's still tough getting up there. Because of course it's a split pinned nut, a castle nut with a split pin, and in an extremely tight area. Another thing people like to do is they'll replace these studs with either a design or a material that's not suitable. These studs are made to stretch and have a stretching point along the shank. And sometimes they'll put in studs that don't have that are solid, and it's just not suitable. The other thing is they'll make them out of a stainless steel to prevent corrosion, and stainless steel doesn't have the same tensile strength as mild steel in most cases. Usually a stainless steel fastener is about a grade 2 tensile strength. And these studs aren't grade 8, but they are probably more like a 6 or something. So they are pretty strong, even though they do have a fair amount of stretchability stretchability to them. Alright, now the last torque. We'll go for that. It's feeling good. Click out of that one, but get a little tighter. One thing I did want to talk about with these head gaskets, which I will get back to after I get the torquing done. This is kind of the final stage in torquing. I want to keep my focus on it. A few more to do. Front three. And the back three. Alright, so cylinder head gaskets. The copper and asbestos original ones worked quite well, and always did. A problem developed though when asbestos became entirely banned in the UK. At one time there was some tolerance to asbestos, and so it was still kind of around. But then their government said there's no more asbestos anywhere, it has to be completely done away with. Even if you had new old stock items that had asbestos in them, they had to be disposed of. So they had to go back and redesign head gaskets using other materials. And when they did that, their choice of material was not good. From what I found out in experience, and there was also a lot of talk about it on a lot of forums about these head gaskets failing. So at that I had that experience and I didn't want to repeat it again, so luckily with that particular car I was able to find a new old stock head gasket, put it on, and everything was fine. So in doing my research and realizing that the gaskets coming out of the UK were no good, I then started to source around and see what was available here in the US, and that's when I discovered that, again, they work and they behave exactly as the original ones did. They don't have the copper cladding on them, but you know, that's fine. So yeah, so just keep that in mind when you go to put your engine together of what gasket you're going to use.